Yes. Justin Stewart, Hannah
Oh, very
Bella,
good, okay.
yeah, Rayland, and
The walls.
Monica Trio.
Handwriting's on the walls. Okay, can everybody who's online hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you all for your patience. We'll now call to order the December 7th, 2022 meeting of the Street and Park Renaming Ad Hoc Committee. Staff, please note the attendance we have. We have a quorum from both people in person and online. I want to again thank all of you who have agreed to serve on this committee and for being here today, whether you're here in person or virtually. First order of business is approval of minutes. I would entertain now a motion to amend or approve the minutes from the October 18th, 2022 meeting.
So moved.
For a second? Second. Moved by committee member Cubey, seconded by committee member Kessler. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Minutes are approved unanimously. Item number 3 is called to the public. The Ad Hoc Committee welcomes public comment. According to the Arizona Open Meeting Law, the committee may only discuss matters listed on the agenda brought up by the public under public appearances. Items brought up by the public under public appearances that are not listed on the agenda cannot be discussed by the committee. There's a 3-minute time limit per person that is in effect, and public comment will be limited to 1 hour total. Is there anyone in the public who has either submitted a card or would like to speak to the committee?
Andrew.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, you got to come around to the podium over here. And is that microphone working?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. When you get to the podium, if you could please state your name so we can get it to the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Gail LeGrander. I've been a Tempe resident for 27 years. I felt that it was important to be in the room today to applaud the efforts of this committee to take the bold step of recognizing the shame and pain of our history and moving in a positive direction so that we as Tempe residents can be better reflective of our aspirational values and goals. I think it takes courage to acknowledge our history. I would hope that your example is something that we would see in other places and jurisdictions, not only across Arizona, but across this country. I hope, I participated online, so I appreciate the opportunity to provide some input into some possible names for your consideration. But I would ask you, as a member of this community, that you elevate the names that increase representation, recognition, and visibility of those who do in fact represent our values as a community and can lead us to into the future in a way that inspires and guides us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak before the committee? Yes, sir. Come up to the podium and state your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Mario Martinez. Okay, and I'm here to address this KKK issue. I feel that in the prior conversations I've attended every meeting, I think it's important to understand the Arizona history of racism, which differed substantially from back east. And I've lived in both places. Back east, the Civil War and slavery was the primary basis of racism, but in Arizona it was quite different. Okay, the primary racism in Arizona was the result of the Mexican-American War, the Gadsden Purchase, and of course the Indian Wars. Ironically and regrettably, the Union Army, the victorious Union Army, which made possible the formal end of slavery, also became the army of near genocide of the Native Americans. Former Union General Philip Sheridan, who was the main cavalry commander, became the commander of the Indian Wars, and he famously said that the only good Indian was a dead Indian. After the near genocidal Indian Wars, the reservations were established, the segregated neighborhoods were established where I and my Mexican family lived, okay? And then after that, with the influx, then the African Americans came and they ended up living in our neighborhood next to us. There's no other place you want to live back then if you would have known it. The KKK, as far as the KKK goes, okay, they were not the first racist organization in Arizona, and they certainly were not the last. Okay, what makes them most pernicious is the horrible, the oppressive violence that included, killings and rape and burnings. It was very, very pernicious. And I am in favor of changing these KKK names, okay? But like I said, I think it's very important to understand the history of the Arizona aspect. It wasn't like, Jim Crow, I never heard of Jim Crow. I came from a segregated neighborhood. Until I went back east. It wasn't like, I came from Flagstaff, but all the neighborhoods were the same. It wasn't like you had a Union side of the Anglos that wanted to keep or didn't want a segregation. The Confederates did. The Civil War in Arizona was not a big deal. There was a skirmish down in Pinnacle Pier, someplace down there, but it was not, it was there. It just was not that big. And anyway, I just wanted to provide the Arizona perspective of the racism that we still have to deal with today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak to the committee? We have someone online who would like to speak. Okay, hearing no one, at this time we'll close the call to the public and we'll move to agenda item 4. Today's meeting, hopefully, we will attempt to narrow down our list of names and possibly finalize recommendations to council. First, let's go over a few activities the staff has been engaged in pursuant to the last meeting in terms of community outreach. Now we'll move to item 4A. Julie Barvell Hartzell will now give a community outreach report.
Hello, everybody, Mr. Chairman, members, thank you. So a couple of things we just wanted to report back on. We did extend the survey submission deadline to November 30th. So that's what a lot of the names on the list that I gave you, where they come from. There's also, for those of you that came in a little late, Mr. Kessler, there's a large handout. Yeah, if Julie wants to just hold it up so people know what we're talking about. That's like a compilation of all of the names that we got. And frankly, members of the public can take that with you when you go if you like. It's a public document. It's available online. And so we extended it through November 30th. And then we had lots of other submissions that we tried to get everything on the master list that's ranked sort of the way you had suggested we do it, which was restorative, sort of others, and then people who are still alive. So you have 2 lists. One is kind of a summarized version, and then one is this really big version that I did email everybody or gave you a hard copy of in one case or the other. And we did get a lot of names from other places. I just found out today that one did not make the list that I got nominated, so I'm so sorry. That's Major Fanny, sorry, I got another document here. Major Fanny McClendon. So we do have her on a document we're going to talk about later, but please know that she's also should be on the restorative list. And I'm sorry if something you told me didn't make it on this list. I tried hard to get everything on there, but we were getting it from a lot of sources. We also did some extra promotion of the options to submit names, and we made some materials. In fact, I passed around a flyer that Lauren is holding on right now, if you want to hold it up. So this is a flyer we made. One of you recommended we make it for the GAIN, getting Arizona involved in neighborhoods event that happened right after our last meeting. We've used it for other activities. And then we did do a postcard that looks very similar to that document. That is in Spanish and English. We sent that to over 3,100 households. So those were everybody who lived on Laird Street or on Hudson Lane, and then anybody who lived in the neighborhoods that surrounded Hudson Park, Redden Park, and Harrelson Park. So that 3,100, those folks got the notice as well. And then we did have a couple of meetings with members representing the 4 Southern tribes. One was a smaller meeting specifically with Gila River and Salt River. And then Maddie made a presentation to the larger monthly 4 Southern Tribes meeting that Ray Lynn had talked about at a previous meeting of this committee. And I just wanted to report out on that. I think, and I'd like Ray Lynn to feel free to chime in here, but I think the recommendation we got from those groups was, first, they appreciated the consultation that the committee was reaching out to get their opinion, but they generally decided not to recommend any names to the committee for a couple of reasons. One being that most of them don't actually live in Tempe. But I think probably more importantly, and please, Ray Lynn, correct me if I say this wrong, but culturally, naming things is not something that is part of their tradition. That's really more the creator or whoever you believe is the person who should be deciding what those names are. And so I think there was it's just not really, doesn't really gel with what they culturally believe, but they certainly want to give us feedback if you want to move in the way of naming something in an African Indigenous related type name or thing. They'll certainly give us feedback. So Ray Lynn, did you want to say something more about that?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so the 4 Southern Tribes really appreciate Maddie for coming out to our 4 Tribes meeting in November and giving the presentation. It was well received, and that is correct. You know, as I stated in the very first meeting that we had, that the naming of streets and parks is not a traditional or cultural tradition that any tribe does. It is a Western culture thing to do, and the names that are of traditional or cultural significance are applied to traditional cultural properties and places that have already been named by our ancestors. So that is correct that the 4 Southern Tribes feels that it won't be, they will not be submitting any names to the committee. However, they stated that any tribal name or word that is received through the City of Tempe public forum and their the website, those names can be considered considered for discussion. And I do appreciate receiving the names in advance so that way I can talk to my colleagues at Salt River and Gila River about these names that come through the public forum. So when we get to that, I know there are some names that have been submitted, and I will comment on those at that time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions on the first 4A? Is there anything before we move on?
All right. Any other questions from the committee for Keely before we move to 4B? Okay. Now we move on to agenda item 4B, which is consideration of suggested names. This is what I would call the heavy lifting part of our meeting potential. It would be optimal, if possible, to narrow down that list that you have. Keely has some slides to help us think about how we want to address a couple of the key issues before we launch the discussion. So you have with you a list of your preferred picks prepared in advance. go ahead and have that ready after these next few slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. So we are going to do, some of you did send me your top 10. I think 9 of you did, so that was helpful. And a couple people who couldn't be here sent me, it wasn't necessarily top 10, but your top choices. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, but I want to go to the next slide because there's some issues you might want to consider as you decide how you want to narrow down the names. So the first one is, do you want to pick 5 or 6 names? There are 5 assets that are being renamed: Hudson Park, Redden Park, Harrelson Park, Hudson Lane, and Laird Street. But West Laird and East Laird Street are divided by a significant amount of area. So you could, conceivably do 2 different names for Laird Street if you wanted to have 6 things to rename instead of 5. So that's something to think about. Next, do you want to recommend just the names, or do you want to recommend names for specific locations? So there are some folks, if you read through all of these nominations, like for instance, there were some people who specifically suggested Sosa Park for Hudson Park because their family homestead was very close to where Hudson Park is now located. Or Hohokamel, which is an O'odham word for butterfly. We're saying that should be close to where Mariposa School is, which is Harrelson Park area. So there are some that have a link, some of them don't have a link. So I think you need to decide if you want to offer names to the council, or if you want to offer them for specific locations. And then some of these may require more historical research if you want it, and Brenda and her staff are available to help with that. A lot of these names have already been researched. There was a lot of research I was able to pull from work that the Tempe History Museum has already done, or things that are like in this book that everybody was interested in last meeting. But we are available to do some more historical research. And then once you narrow it down to whatever number that is, 10, more than 10, whatever, if it's more than 6 or 5, do you want to put it back out for more community outreach, more community input, or do you just want to make a decision either today or at a future meeting? And then I think, Andrew, you had mentioned maybe any names being something that could be forwarded to the council for other purposes in the future too. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I mean, we've gotten, at least, being asked to do a top 10 indicates that there's a potential that there's more than 5 or 6 that would be worthy names for consideration for naming or renaming. So my thought would be that if we end up at the end of today's discussion, rank ordering and or, I should say, appending those names to specific locations, we may end up with names that are meritorious, but just there's not enough current locations. One of the ideas would be that since those names have been vetted by this group, that we could pass on a recommendation to council that we have an existing list of names of persons or whatever that could be utilized by them in the future for the naming of other facilities, new parks, new streets, other facilities within the city that could also, it could help them not start from scratch, that this group is already convened for that purpose. And while those names were certainly worthy, we just ran out of locations to use for those names, but they could still be very useful to council for that purpose, assuming we get to that. If there's a hard break and there's no names after 5 or 6, then maybe it's not useful, but it seems to me like since we were asked to do 10, I mean, I was looking at the list for a long time and it was hard for me to come up with just 10. There are a lot of really excellent, at least in my opinion, from where I sit, there are some excellent suggestions of names there that extended beyond 5 or 6. And so that alone might be a reason potentially for us to say, while they didn't get here this time, we certainly would recommend them for future consideration. Just a moment.
We go back to the list of questions and go through them.
Yes, let's go back to the list of questions. Could move back on the slide, the slide we just had up.
Yeah, so this, this is, well, what I have here is the list of people's top 10s. So that I already got. So I compiled the ones, and you can see the slash marks are kind of votes. So 5 or 6 of you already suggested Michelle Brooks Tatras. 5 or 6 of you suggested San Pablo. So this is everybody, all of the ones I've already gotten from 9 committee members. Some of them being people here, but not everybody who's here. So just to kind of maybe just get you starting to narrow down. And the one that didn't make my original list, which I apologize, is Major Franny McClendon. She's on the second row, and if someone wants to talk about her a little bit, I'm sorry, I didn't add her, so you didn't get a little bit of background on her in your documents, so I don't know if Lauren, you want to mention that?
I'd be happy to, and I recently became aware of, it's Fanny, by the way, you've seen Fanny? Fanny McClendon. She was in the Air Force, and, well, first of all, she's 101 years old. She's a Tempe resident. So she is, she's still alive, and I know we can talk about older people maybe that have passed, but I wonder if this could be an exception. She was the first woman to command an all-male squadron with a Strategic Air Command. So she was a veteran in World War II. Amazing. She's been honored recently in the past few months. There's been stories about her on the news and on the radio, but an amazing woman. And I think of the squadron, there's only like a handful of people left alive, and she's one of the remaining members of this rather large squadron of 800 or so. But she's an amazing Tempe treasurer who I never heard about until recently. And to me, she just catapults to the top of any list. And I know that there's been a strong suggestion from the members of the Love Victoria community that the streets that are named after war heroes, especially World War II heroes. So what an appropriate thing, this person has such a background and has been a hero in World War II and is African-American and is 101 years old. To me, that just seems like this natural alignment with Laird Street. It also argues, said, should we separate and have 6? I think we should have 6. West Laird and East Laird are significantly different. East Laird is in the Love Victoria section, allows us to maybe, think about a veteran there. And West Laird is significantly different, allows us maybe to think about Romo Jones and that connection with the Laird School, since Romo Jones sued who's Laird versus, or Romo Jones versus Laird, and Romo Jones won that lawsuit to help desegregate Tempe schools. So there seems to be there's sometimes, and I'm answering sort of the second question happened, there's natural places where people could go if they do meet the criterion that all of us have. So I know I've thrown a lot out there, but I did want to talk about Major Fanny because I feel like there's been a big gap in my knowledge of my city not to have known about her. She's an amazing woman.
Raylan also has.
Yes. Raylan, your hand is up.
I wanted to point out 2 of the tribal names, the Peepash. We would not want that to be used because in translation it means people. We also would not want to use A'atham because that also translate as to people. They are okay with the word hohokamo, which translates as butterfly. So that name can remain among the list. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead, Tom.
I have a suggestion relative to the 5 or 6 names. I'm in favor of keeping the street name for East and West Laird consistent. There are geographically, I think it will make things easier for people trying to navigate around town. There are other streets in Tempe that are broken up by properties or, the lakes, things like that. And I think it makes sense to me for the consistency of that one street just going through, even though it's broken up. I would recommend that we just assign it one name.
Go ahead, Joy.
And whatever names we come up with, we can still do some further research on those names, right? To make sure that there's nothing, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some research, but we can always ask
Do a
for
little more,
additional
yeah.
research to be conducted. Yes, Phil?
The one thing I've noticed is that Tempe, there's no shortage of important people in Tempe's history. And what I see in presentations for the names and the wonderful things they did, what it could end up being is a contest as to who's more important. And I don't think that it's what we're about. I don't think that we're trying to find out who's the most important person who deserves to have a street named after them. So I'm leaning more toward geographic names, names that occur in nature, rather than picking one person out of the group of incredible people that Tempe has produced. Just my opinion, but I think it will somehow help us not argue so much when we get down to the wire as to who gets the street named after them. Just that's the way I think. Anyway, thanks.
I'm going to go next to Justin online.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you. I just wanted to point out a name that I also added late. That wasn't on the original list, and that's the Crimson Rims. And I'm not sure that would get enough traction in a place like this. But talking about the possible names for parks and things in the future, Crimson Rims, I found well, like just kind of going through the material that was provided us by the history staff and staff in general, is the Tempe Negro League baseball team, and with the connection that Tempe has to baseball around town with the Cactus League and spring training, would be really cool in the future to think of that name somehow connect to that or tied to that and give some recognition. Even if we get like a ball diamond in the future or something like that, where that could be named. I just wanted to throw that name out there and just give a little history behind the Crimson Rims and everything. So that's all. I understand there's probably a lot more deserving people of that on this list, maybe, or something like that, but just some explanation of what I was thinking of when I suggested the Crimson Rims there. And just for my quick thought is, I think we should go with 6 names. In overall, I think it's fine breaking up East and West Laird.
Thanks, Justin. Lauren?
Well, just in response to Bill, we did have previous discussions about that. There was a consensus that the names, I mean, obviously you can disagree, but there was a consensus that we should move towards restorative names because that's
Absolutely.
why we're
I
here.
understand.
And it's so true that we have a wealth of names that we need to choose from, and it's going to be difficult, and that's part of why we're here, is to make those sort of difficult decisions. And I personally feel just to go with, Agave Street or whatever would be a little bit of a cop-out, and not the real reason we're here.
All right, I agree. Thank you.
That's fair. In fairness, we also decided earlier by consensus that we wouldn't consider people who live in
Right.
either.
And I think we should stick with that.
And that's
As much as she may
that's
be a
in no
wonderful-
way a reflection upon everything you just said about Baker. She sounds like an incredible lady and should be honored in some way and at some point. And I'm not saying I wouldn't revisit it if there was a consensus to do so. That's what's, I think, is such an honor to be a part of this group, is that we bring such diverse opinions to the table and our perspectives. Your perspective helps inform mine and vice versa, I hope. So it's good to hear from everyone. Maybe in terms of making recommendations, should I call a question at some point in the not too distant future on the question of 5 versus 6 locations? Would that be helpful to do that initially, or go ahead, Shereen?
Well, we probably will have more than 5 or 6 that we'll all think are worthy. And if we can come to that, we could also give the city council our top 10. And then they could narrow down, these are things that we vetted, that we believe are relevant, are important. And then they can go ahead and select 5 or 6, and then hold those others, as we mentioned, for future opportunities. Because I'm looking at that list and there's certainly 5 or 6 right away, and that's, obviously, this is not everybody's vote and we haven't talked through it. But I think we might have trouble narrowing it down to 5 or 6. And if we all can come to some agreement with a slightly larger number, we could hand those off.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's a fair point. If we came up with a group of 10, let's say, recommended names, And if we could say, council, there was a conversation we had at the committee level about whether or not to break up Laird Street. There was opinions for and against breaking up Laird Street. If council were to want to name 6 locations versus 5, you have a list of 10 potentially from the committee that you could choose from to then name that 6th facility if you chose to do so. I mean, that would be perfectly okay to me.
Just the way we, in fairness, what you said, it's true, but we did make the decision about only honoring those that have passed. We made that decision. Why not go forward? I mean, to me, West Laird, East Laird, it can get confusing. What's West Laird, East Laird, where it is, and they're so distantly, they're not connected at all. So to me, it gives us the opportunity to spread the wealth more, and we have a lot of names, and so we're adding a 6th. To me, I mean, I would be in favor of just making the decision and just seeing what the consensus is.
Right. It's all a recommendation.
Right.
We're recommending, based on our discussion and direction, to give council, 10 names for 6 locations or 10 names for 5 locations. Ultimately, they get to decide whether they want to name Laird for 2 or for 1. So, I mean, but we can certainly send a recommendation in either way. That's why I was asking what would be helpful to kind of move the conversation from where we are now to where we want to go this afternoon. So certainly.
Well, I tend to think it's okay because they are geographically quite separate, the two. I'm okay with having 6, but I still like the idea of giving the council some other options as part of that, because there may be other things coming up that we're not even aware of, where they say, I don't know, Crimson Rims will go ahead and do something near Angel Stadium because we're putting in a new field there or something, but if that reached our top 10. But I'm okay with having 6 as our minimum. And, obviously the council will decide if they want to keep that together.
I'm fine with 6 as well.
Okay. Okay. Is everybody comfortable? I mean, I understanding where Mel's position is. Are we comfortable then in our recommendation with 6 recommendations coming forward as opposed to 5? Anyone online want to weigh in?
This is Raylan. I'm fine with that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so I will note for the record that the consensus is that we, in creating a list, will do so with the recommendation that there be 6 namings, which would be the division of an East Laird and a West Laird for 2 different names. Okay? So,
Can I just say one thing?
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I divided up because there were 2 different families, these, Sotelo, Sosa, Sotelo, and Sosa. So just, I mean, I would recommend kind of thinking of all of those together when you're grouping, or I don't know how you want to handle that, but I didn't want to make it seem like they had less votes because they're divided up. So I just want to make sure you saw that.
Understood. For the conversation about which names, one of the ways that we could have that conversation today is in looking at those of us who provided in advance our top 10, we see some that have a number of votes next to them and some that have far less. For instance, just going off of what I think I'm reading here, Mary Moses Green or Mary Green looks like it has 6. I think if I'm reading that, that's 6 slashes, 6 votes, if you will. And then you have Thomas, Mother Maggie, and Theodore Old Tom Thomas or Maggie Thomas has 5, as well as Michelle Brooks Tatras and Sam Pablo have 5. I don't see any with 4, and then we have a number with 3, which would be Sotelo Souza. I guess we can talk about, to your point, Keely, what that means in terms of voting. Okema, Obregon. I'm sorry, we do have 1 with 4, I apologize. Adolfo, Babe Romo, and Joaquina Jones had 4. Okay, so you had 1 with 6, 2 with 3 with 5, and 1 with 4 votes. So right there, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recommendations and then you have a list of a number with 3. Is that a helpful place to start? Or is there any that have less than 3 votes at this time that anyone wants to speak to? Because this is still not, I mean, again, this is just a assistive tool in advance of our conversation. Any name that anyone wants to put forward, we could certainly take a vote and talk about or discuss as well. Go ahead.
It's just a question, and as an example, the Adolfo Bay Romo and Joaquina Jones. What would we pick out of that name sequence to put on, I'm thinking of the big concrete obelisk in the front of a park.
Right.
What would we put there? I mean, would all of that be on the obelisk, and is it small enough font that, you're not gonna read it? And thinking about the consistency of current, naming approaches.
Yeah.
Is that something we need to talk about in terms of picking a name? Is it just the last name that, we select, et cetera?
Yeah, we'll go to Lauren first and then Monica.
I think you make a really, really good point. And when I was doing my recommendations, I kind of rephrased it, because in that instance, I think the proper thing would be Romo Jones Street and not have the entirety, but that could also be decided case by case. In the instance of Romo, you might say Romo was the one on the lawsuit, right? It was Romo versus Laird. It's like, why not put Romo? But Joaquina Jones, first of all, she's African-American. But also, she was very much a part of that lawsuit. But in that day, you didn't have the woman, the wife wasn't on the lawsuit. So in a way, it's a restorative thing to also add in Jones. And so in that instance, I think it could be Romo Jones. In terms of the Greens, it could be, Green Street. That could be decided. It could be Mary Moses Green Street, or it just could be Green Street. So, I mean, I think it could be done individually, but I don't think we necessarily have to be locked into saying the entirety of the name, depending.
Is what we've just talked about, is that something that this committee needs to make a recommendation on, name formatting, or is that something we leave up to city council?
Speaking for myself, I would like to see us make that recommendation for formatting, only because I just think that would help them. If they get into what names are removed and what aren't, then, I think we're not quite, we could, if we can, and it makes sense for this committee to do that, it's within our scope, then we probably should, I would say. Monica, I think you were next.
Yeah, I think my question's kind of been addressed with that. I don't know that we could put Mother Maggie and Theodore Old Tom Thomas or Maggie Thomas on a street name. So I assume that would probably just be Thomas Road. But with that said, there's like 4 different Sotelos on this list here, or Souza, sorry. So like, would then Souza be the choice if we combined all 4 of them?
Yeah, good point. Yes, Julie.
This kind of speaks to this issue, is that, I think I brought up last time that I think it would be great next to this, the park name or whatever, that there's some context of, this was renamed because Laird was a former blah, 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 and it is now this. And then we can include, the longer names.
Like have some sort of plaque or monument
Yes.
in the vicinity of these areas, either in a park, if it's a park, or on the street somewhere that can be erected that can provide some context and history.
Yeah.
Vote to go to a webpage.
And webpage, yeah.
Yeah, good idea.
It's a great idea.
I will say, Keena Jones, when she was buried with the name Romo as well. So at some point in her life, she didn't take the Romo's name.
Yes, sure.
Well, I'd like to speak to the Sosa, because there are generations of that, and also Sotelo. And so, I know that people, they're groups, they're apart. I'd like to see us consider, a Sosa as one and a Sotelo as another. Keep them separate, not because, even though they were connected in many ways, they both did different things. There were some really significant things that they did in terms of helping found Tempe, as part of the families. So just as a thought, as we're going through those, to have have them as 2 separate options versus keeping them as one, which is what the first one says, Sotelo Sosa.
The other thing, Mr. Chairman, that I didn't put on here because it wasn't specifically recommended by the person who just gave me Sotelo, but Sotelo Ranch was mentioned a lot in the nominations as a place, so that's maybe another way that you'd want to talk about Sotelo Ranch Park or something like that, possibly.
That's great. And it's listed on our restorative name suggestions as Sotelo or Sotelo Ranch. So that could be a good park.
For, other discussion?
Sorry. We talked about, how we replace names with which location. And to me, someone who rises, Michelle Brooks talked to us, would that be best as park name? Because you can include the whole name, the park name, or the street name, it might be a little too long. For a street name, maybe it should be shortened, but you don't want to shorten someone's name and how they identify it. So that might argue for being a park name rather than a street name. But I'd love to hear what other people.
Which one? Or just
Michelle gives
Michelle?
is that it's kind of a long street name, but as a park name, it would be sort of easier to have the whole name in there. Or would you,
Yeah, I mean, I think once we decide on the names, then we could make recommendations on where we want it, or we could just say park versus street. And then, I mean, there might be some that are more relevant to certain areas based on their location, like I'm, in terms of that, like if we, and I have to, I don't have the map in front of me, but, so in that sense, I think we could look at it for any of these where the park name should have something, so, the Sotelo, just based on its location, might be good for something like a Hudson Park because it's closest quote to the Creamery area, which is where they did a lot of things. So I think we could just maybe make that general recommendation that says this one would be more appropriate for a park versus, and then the whole name could work. Because I agree, we don't want to have some of these, the whole name would be tough for a street.
Yes,
I have, again, one question for clarification. Other than the McClendon name, are all the other individual family names, are they all deceased people that we're talking about, or are any of them still alive? As I thought we talked
Believe
about.
so.
We didn't-
Betty Greathouse is alive.
Oh, she is. Oops, sorry. Did you want me to remove the ones based on your consensus, or do you want to just leave them on there for now?
Unless the committee wants to, I mean, if there's a change of direction, that's fine.
No, I think we've agreed that.
Okay.
And to your point, I mean, there's several generations of Sotelos and Sosas still in Tempe who are alive, but the specific names that were associated with them, like their pioneer kind of families, they're certainly dead. So I guess there are people alive in that family, but if you just did a name, like just their last name, you're not talking about someone specific.
Right.
Other discussion? So, let me see if I can make a suggestion and see if it's helpful or not. You can tell me if it is. I would suggest, based upon what we've received so far, that Mary and Moses Green or Mary Green, a street named after Green, I think would be one that I think always shows that it has significant support. That would be one of the 6 that if I were to make a motion, which I won't because I'm the chair, but if a motion were to be made, I could see myself supporting such a motion to have a facility named after Green. Similarly, just going off of the counts so far, I would also support Michelle Brooks Tatras moving forward, and San Pablo, and Romo Jones. So that's a total of 4. After that, I would just say that I think that this committee, for the reasons that we've talked about before and based on the outreach that staff did, I think it would be a good idea to have a name associated with indigenous peoples. And that one that I think hasn't been already otherwise eliminated, excuse me, is Hohokam, that name should be moved forward as well. And that leaves then 5, and then you've got the rest of them, and some of them have some similar votes, Thomas, Sotelo, Souza. That's why I think once we get past that 5, at least for my looking at this in my analysis, which again, that's me speaking, but if it's helpful, then we can start talking about actually expanding the list that are recommended names that council can then choose from, either on their own in substitution of a recommended name or at a future date. And that would include Sotelo, Sosa, probably Thomas and Obregon. And possibly Ragsdale.
Do we also want to highlight the Mother Maggie? Yeah.
Yeah, I just said that. That's,
Oh, yeah.
that's Thomas.
Okay.
I just heard
Oh,
that
is
as
it
Thomas.
Like,
Oh, okay.
you want me to just highlight all the ones that you talked about? All right, I'll just do that.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, Thomas is 5, though.
Yeah.
You want me to divide the Sotelos and Sosas?
Divide to tell.
Yeah,
we'll
we'll
just
just
together.
I really would like to see something, and I understand you're going on these numbers that are up there, which are sort of incomplete because not everybody.
Right, I agree.
voted. So I get,
Place to start.
it's a good place to start, really what you have is a good list. But I really would like to see something with Sotelo and Sosa.
Yeah.
I think they were so integral to the founding of Tempe and to, when you look at what they did. So I'd like to see us somehow really consider, you've got the Sosa family right by, according to this anyway, by Hudson Park, but just both of them had really big impacts on Tempe. So I'd like to just see those in that top. I agree. Group in some way.
In order to make room for that, would it make sense then to, even though San Pablo got a number of votes and is included as such, since it's not after a person, but it's more of a location, would setting that aside from the top 6 make sense to make room for both Sotelo and Sosa?
So it's a great question. Unfortunately, that's one of my favorites. but-
Yeah, no,
San Pablo, so,
I voted for it.
because I really think that's a really important.
Historically, it was a historically significant area in Tempe for many years.
Right. But I don't know if I don't know that we'd have to remove that one for those 2, but we can talk more about, I just wanted to mention those 2.
I don't know who had their hand up first between you or Monica. Sure. Okay, we'll go Monica and then Laura. Go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, also, we got to keep in mind too, like, I think San Pablo was recommended, from what I saw from the comments, if I'm not mistaken, for La Victoria neighborhood for Laird. So also associating, like, I wouldn't completely remove it because I think there was a strong, if I'm not confusing with something else, I think that one was the one that it was recommended for.
I agree. I'll just say, as going through this kind of thinking out loud, I wouldn't remove San Pablo. I just said, as we forward names, there'd be some that, that would be very much worthy that we should note for council that might be in excess of the 6 that we are going to recommend actually be considered for naming immediately. So I'm not asking that it be removed from consideration, just whether or not there's an interest in moving it up or down from recommended for immediate naming versus recommended for future naming. But again, I voted for San Pablo too. I think it's a great historic suggestion. Yes, Lauren.
A couple comments. I mean, I'm intrigued by the Crimson Rims. It seems like I'd want to recommend that go forward, but in a different way. I mean, there's going to be opportunities, I think, with our sports facilities to maybe think about a name there that would align with some of our baseball fields, but I'm really intrigued for that name. But I do worry in the sense that we have to be aware of the restorative aspect of this. When you think about the KKK, what communities are most impacted by the KKK? We cannot turn away from the fact that Black communities were most impacted by the KKK. And we are looking at a specific time in history that we're trying to face and confront. And I don't want to move too far away from that. And, I don't know what I'm proposing, like to put extra bonus points to someone who comes from African-American experience in Tempe. But to me, I mean, that's the heart of why we're here. And the KKK, there are a lot of impacts in communities, but the Black community faced the largest impacts from KKK policies in Tempe. So I don't know if I have the consensus about that, but I just wanted to add that to our thoughts and not to move too far away from honoring names of Black residents who, and, you know, we don't even know of the history because we haven't been presented with that or offered that. You know, people weren't even allowed to be part of the historical record because there's so much discrimination within our city. So I wanted to bring that right in.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make one note about the Crimson Rim. They were not a Negro League team. We're a multiracial team, included many different members of the community. And so I just want to make sure that that was noted.
Yes, Shereen.
So I see this as an opportunity for us in many ways. And so while I understand that the KKK is what sparked this, you know, us doing this, but we, for a long time, have neglected to recognize the importance of the Hispanic community to the founding of Tempe. And I see this as an opportunity to address that as part of it. So while what happened with the KKK is what spurred us on to make these decisions, I think we should not lose that opportunity to also give some recognition to the people who helped found our community and built it from the ground up. So I guess that's why I'd like to see a balance of that. So I understand what you're saying. I just would like to have us take advantage of this opportunity to recognize people who and groups that were not previously recognized as how important they were to our community.
Monica, I noticed your hand is still raised. Was that from before or do you have additional? Monica,
Sorry, what was that?
your hand is still up. I just didn't know if you had.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to leave it up. Sorry.
No worries. Want to check. One other thing, and we didn't put it into this chart, but I just wanted to just put it out there because it was a comment that we received from the public was there an interest on the part of the committee to look at Hudson, I want to say it was Hudson and Redden,
Right.
whether or not there was an interest, because we, as part of the research that was done by staff, determined exactly which member of the Hudson group was in fact a KKK member. And so the suggestion was made, do we more explicitly name the park and the road after the Hudson Manor or something along those lines, or for the Pioneer Redden family, that it be clarified for the names of Redden family members who were not members of the KKK. And I only mention that because it was a suggestion that was made. And I'll just put it out, there's discussion, great. If not, we can move on. I just wanted to make sure that that was put out there. And yes, Justin.
I don't think we should do that. I just think the whole purpose of like removing those names is not to add any confusion about who those names are named about. As I mentioned the last meeting when we talked about this, we can clarify who Hudson Park's going to be. We could say it's the C Hudson or the quote unquote good Hudson, but the truth of the matter is everyone's still going to call it Hudson Park, and it's still going to fall back on the original Hudson name of that was picked out. Same with Redden. I just think we need to move on from those names.
Do I have a consensus then to move on from the names Hudson and Redden at this point? Okay, make sure. Okay, so I'll just ask the committee this, in addition to the names that you see currently highlighted on the screen, is there any other ones either there on the screen or not on the screen that any member of the committee would like to speak to or to offer up? Yes, sure.
Okemo was supposed to be highlighted, I think, not Obregon.
Oh.
Oh, no, I take it back. Obregon's fine, but Okemo was also highlighted. I think that was one that we heard. And then I just had a question about Lincoln Ragsdale. I know accomplishments, what he did, but was he from Tempe?
I don't believe so.
So I guess my suggestion would be, even though he's did a huge amount, that he would not be included, because we would like that. I think it would be good for us to focus more on Tempe.
Any discussion about not considering, well, let me ask you this, Shereen, just as a clarification. Would you say to not consider them for the immediate naming of the areas, the facilities in question? Or would you feel comfortable potentially forwarding his name as part of a top 10 for future consideration?
I'm not comfortable with it because, to be honest, I think we should focus on, we have enough Tempe folks that have done a lot for the community? Because otherwise there are others who I think we could have easily included as part of that. I mean, I know that, and this is a little off topic, but when the mural was being done, that's on Fifth Street, Calvin Good was originally going to be on that mural, and then the decision was that he didn't live in Tempe. So even though he did a huge amount for the really metropolitan Phoenix primarily, they wanted to focus more on Tempe residents. So that's what my preference would be to say not to forward his name because he wasn't a Tempe resident. It's just my opinion.
Well, go ahead, yeah.
I believe Lincoln Ragsdale was included because he was the Maricopa branch president of the NAACP before the establishment of East Valley NAACP. So he did work, do a lot of work in Tempe. He's also responsible for bringing Martin Luther King to ASU. So probably one of the only, I believe that was the uncovering of the Martin Luther King speech delivered at ASU in 1961. And so Lincoln Ragsdale was the primary force behind bringing Martin Luther King probably one of his own speeches in Arizona. So I just want to say that is the city of Tempe.
Thank you, Roy. Roy Tatum, everyone. I don't know if you all know Roy. He's assisting us with community outreach as part of City of Tempe. And we appreciate that information. I did not know that. Thank you. Yes.
And I would just like to argue too that we should include Lincoln Ragsdale. We've had many influencers in Tempe who haven't necessarily lived in Tempe. We have people on commissions who are not living in Tempe, but work in Tempe and have broad influence in our city. And to me, Lincoln Ragsdale's regional importance is more than justifies including him on the list. And he's someone that had great influence on desegregation. And we know Tempe faced segregation issues in a very powerful way, as we see with the Rolla Jones case and with, all the redlining and the sundowning, our city being a sundown town. So I would like to advocate that we keep Lincoln Ragsdale in the mix.
Okay. Yes.
We can't hear you.
It's my teacher.
There you go.
I'm Dr. Lisa McMillan, the Chief Diversity Officer for the City of Tempe. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to add a store program. And it goes back to what you were talking about. Dr. Martin Luther King was invited to the ASU campus. So, Mr. Ragsdale, yet he had to give that speech on the lawn because he could not go into the facility at age. So that segregation, along with sundown laws and the like, is the reason why you don't have a critical mass. Actually participated in creating alliance. So it relates, we really have to, and I say we, not as African Americans, we had to rely, not just African Americans, I mean, us as people had to rely on outside influences, regional influences to move the needle here in Tempe. And that's not uncommon. I mean, that's what Americans do, right? They help wherever help is. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. So we're
11.
like I said, Lincoln Ragsdale is on there and highlight. We heard in a perspective, but I think, are we okay consensus wise to keep that as a name for consideration to be passed on for council at this point? Appreciate that. Thank you. Again, are there any other names that are not highlighted or are not on this list that any member of the committee would like to speak to or to move forward for consideration? Okay. Hearing none, within that group of, is it now 11 names? Okay, which would be Michelle Burks Tatra is one, San Pablo 2, Sotelo 3, Souza 4, Pahokemel 5, Okama 6, Obregon 7, Romo, Jones 8, Thomas 9,
Ms. Green.
I'm sorry, yes, Green 10, Lincoln Ragsdale 11, okay. So that's 11.
I made an error when I said Okama should be, I don't think that was on, I mean, it does have 3, so we could certainly keep it if we wanted to, and I know it's important because it was a neighboring community and, I mean, I know the background a little bit of it. But I think I said that one should have been on.
I didn't actually hear, but I mean.
Yeah, so that was my error to say that, but we could still, but I know it was a community right adjacent to Tempe. That was African-American community. So I just wanted to clarify that that was my error, that when I added, I was confusing that with something else.
I mean, to the extent that we submit a top 10 or a top 11 from my perspective, ends up being, if they're all worthy names, and we know that there's 6 that are going to be forwarded for recommendation for immediate naming, that doesn't mean the other 4 or 5 would not then go with that additional recommendation that they are, you know, worthy of naming of facilities at a future date.
I would suggest we put that at the bottom of the list, though. To me, it's not as important as some of the others.
Yeah. But to the point that was just made by Dr. Humes, part of what I think about in terms of why that community existed outside of Tempe was because of prevailing conditions, laws, and attitudes within the city that prevented those individuals from living in Tempe. So there is sort of a restorative point of naming that name in history to say, this is why the geographical distinction was made in the first place, because of, you know, racist and segregated views.
No, I agree. I agree. I think it's important. I just wanted to clarify that I think I thought it was on the list.
Very good.
I think it is important.
Okay. Is the committee comfortable then with now limiting our discussion from this point to the 11 that we have and attempting to rank order them, A, and B, assigning them then those that fall in the top 6 to specific places? Okay. Any suggestions from the committee as to how you would like to rank order? We could do that by vote or by ballot today. You could just have everybody rank order the 11, and we could tabulate that today is one option. Or however you want to do it. Yes.
I have just one question. We need to segregate this list of names between those that would be for parks only or for streets only, or is it, we don't care at this point?
Again, that's up to the committee. If you would like to have a discussion about names that you think are more appropriate for a particular location, we could do that, because what that will do is then that means that name would be preferred for that location, and then maybe if there are some that rise to the top, and we already have a consensus about a particular location and a particular name, I guess that would be good information to know if that exists. So again, I would ask the committee, how would you like to proceed in terms of, at this point? Would you like to go by location and talk about most suitable names for locations? Or rank order and then assign the top 6 to locations? I can go either way. But to your point, Mel, you're right. There may be some names that are more appropriate for a park than they are for a,
To try it as an exercise.
okay. All right.
We're gonna put it back up. I'm just gonna make a shorter list that just has those in them really quickly.
So I guess I would ask the folks online and everyone in the room, are you, at this point, would you like to proceed by location and look at the universe of 11 names and make determinations as to recommendations? And it can be more than one recommendation for a particular location as well. Is that everyone's pleasure at this point?
Sure, let's try it as it may have use that may, falter, but I think it could help clarify with some of the things.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Where to first?
Can I, are you gonna put it up? No? Just give me 1 second. I'm almost done. Sorry. I was gonna put up the list so they could look at the list that you had while I was trying to finish this. Okay, I'm just gonna go back this list. Okay, I was trying to make a quick other list. I just wanted to remind you a couple of things. How do I share again? I'm sorry. I stopped sharing so that I thought you were gonna put up the existing list while I made a shorter list, but we clearly did not communicate well. My apologies. Okay. I'm just looking at it here. All right, so we're back to this list. Let me blow it up. Just a couple of things just to remind some folks of, just because I've been looking at these a lot closer than some of you probably. San Pablo, so the village of San Pablo, Barrio San Pablo, La Victoria and Escalante are sort of remnants of that. A lot of people were moved from San Pablo to those areas, so just to take that into consideration. So Tello Ranch, somebody mentioned, is close to the Creamery, so sort of close to Hudson Park. Sosa the Sosa homestead was supposed to be very close to Hudson Park. Pojo Camel, the idea was that that might be good for Harrelson Park because there's a Mariposa school in Harrelson Park, close to Harrelson Park, so the idea that there's that link with butterflies. Romo Jones, Laird Street, obviously there's a connection to Laird there. And I think those would be the only ones that at least the public gave feedback about a connection to a specific location.
Okay.
Transport Michelle Brooks with learning change. In geographical area that's expensive.
Might be good near Hudson Lane, because that's near ASU, but she was really, wasn't she? I don't know. But then again, she was right here too at the museum.
I've heard about them to Michelle's house, but the address that I have for her says 1033 East Frost Drive, Tempe 85282. Pardon? Yeah. But she was asking where did.
No, I don't. So it's south of the freeway and all to rural, pretty much rural and baseline areas.
What about the Greens? Where did they? We know where the Greens.
You know where the Greens homesteaded? They were the first settlers, black settlers.
The Greens, were they over south?
Oh, really? So they could be good with Carrollson Park. Right? Nice, spot, right?
Rural and Warner Roads. Rural and Warner Roads.
Yeah.
That's from the Harrelson.
That's right.
Yeah, it's close there.
That could be a good place for that. Yes. But that's where their homestead was? Yeah.
And then
Can we throw out, can we just connect some of the geographical,
you want me to write the geographical sections on there? Okay.
I'll tell you multiple ones.
So where did you guys, I'm sorry, I didn't follow what you said from Michelle Brooks Tatras. Where was that location?
South Tempe.
They said it's Hudson Park, Redmond. Where's Redmond?
Redmond's down by 85283.
I think you guys each have a map.
Oh, yeah, there's a map.
But you know, the green, that Harrelson Park could be a really nice area for them, because that's right near where their homestead was.
Okay.
Redmond is just south of Marcos Deniza High School. Redmond Park.
Is that the one that's near Mariposa School, Redmond?
No, it's, Harrelson is near
Harrelson's
Mariposa,
near.
but you know, that was just an idea someone suggested. I'm just making sure you know that. So Tella was Creamery, which isn't really, I guess it's close to Hudson Park, but Sosa's
Close to
closer.
there as well.
That's true.
Well, one of the comments about Laird has been the veterans as well as, right?
One of the Lairds.
The Victory Acres, right?
Restaurant.
And, but then you have San Pablo where the people basically were pushed out and moved over to La Victoria. So there's that historic.
And Laird School is on the west side, right?
It's on, yeah, West Laird,
Laird School.
close
There's the
to,
West Laird.
North Tempe.
No, I know. So for Roma Jones, we recommend.
that's, I was thinking West Laird for that.
Oh, I see what you're saying, connected to near school.
Back to,
West Laird is where it's, is it Gilliland Middle School or the former
I
Gilliland?
think it's Laird School was there.
Laird, oh, actually Laird School is up in North.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay, further
It's
north.
on-
Yeah, you're right.
It was changed, the
Yeah.
name was changed.
It's changed,
By the-
changed, as was Gilliland. It changed too. So, okay.
Thank you, Monica, for the name change.
I'm gonna put Lincoln
Oh,
Rise.
I'm actually here right now with our superintendent, so he can clarify where the Laird Street and Laird School is.
Tempe Elementary for your leadership.
Yeah.
What an even.
Your elementary school though, over on the West Laird, near that?
Laird is,
Yeah.
Laird Street is actually not far from Mitchell Park, the one on the other side, not the one in La Victoria. But it's closer to Mitchell Park, honestly. So I guess it is closer to what we call Geneva Epps Mosley, which is Gillen.
Yeah, Laird Street is closer to Mosely.
So I'm thinking, Lauren, if you've thought about Romo and Jones in that area.
Yeah, for West Laird.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Can you, I'm sorry, what did you
West
say?
Laird, Romo Jones.
That's what I had down already. Okay. That's what I was thinking, where you were headed with that.
This is Justin. I think it'd make a lot of sense to have Romo and Jones over up here at West Laird.
That's where we have it.
Okay. Trying to make this so we can all read it better. Let's go ahead and do this.
Lincoln Ragsdale, does West Hudson Lane make sense just because it's much closer to the universities?
Well, there was,
Having even a list that's associated with the lane.
I was thinking, Michelle Brooks Coaches, because I don't know. Hope that that fit her better, but I may be thinking of somebody else. For that one. It says South Tempe. That's where you said, is that where you said she lived?
Yeah, she lived on the baseline and
Oh, so that was
closest to Redden Park.
Redden Park. Well, can I ask what we would want to suggest for East Laird Street in, because I think we have several potential options there. And what people might think about that, whether it's San Pablo or Sosa or Sotelo in both the Laird Street and Hudson Park area. What thoughts might people have?
For now, can we just put East Laird Street and just suggest San Pablo, Sotelo, Sosa, or three possibilities? Or do we know where, Obregon, where he lived?
Oh, no, if somebody looks up Obregon in that big list, there was a big, long write-up about him. I don't remember where he was from,
Worked at the mill.
Tempe Pioneer was a farmer, worked at Hayden Flour Mill.
Doesn't really say where Obregon lived, just that he worked at the flour mill.
right. Could do some more research on him.
It might be if there's 10 and they have to choose 6, the ones that have a more of a natural connection to a location, like Harrelson Park with the Green family might argue that that moves up into the top 6 list, you know, because it has a stronger connection geographically.
Well, maybe I can make a suggestion on East Laird, since the historical record says that people were relocated to that area from San Pablo, that street be named for San Pablo. for where they came from.
East Laird?
I'm just making I'm just throwing it out there for people to comment.
That's my vote for that.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to write on here in a better way to look at it, what this recommendations are and like the areas that were associated with them to the extent we have one in a separate.
So
That's great.
I know we don't want to get into this where we ask for citizen decision on each one of them, that we're going to just go down this rabbit hole, but I'm wondering in the case of La Victoria, since there might be multiple suggestions, I don't know how someone would feel. I'm very aware that I am a white person here, someone of privilege, and we're making some, decisions about neighborhoods. Now, it could be that San Pablo is a painful reminder that it even re-traumatized, like, no, it may have a painful recollection to people or association, and maybe they would rather have a different, name of the names that we give. So in this instance, should we consult with a neighborhood association and just give them a number of choices and ask for a recommendation?
Well, remember that they were talking at the public comment that the streets were named after World War II veterans.
And was that one person saying that? Was it multiple people?
Their neighborhood association president, I believe, was
Right.
to.
But.
And
I don't
we do
think we
have
have
more
any veterans there, do we?
Ragsdale. Yeah, there. Yeah, Ragsdale.
Was Ragsdale veteran?
Yeah. Ragsdale was he was a Tuskegee Airman.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Was he ever? Yeah, wow. Well.
That might be a good connection there.
But I think your suggestion might be good, though, to talk to the neighborhood association and say, here's some information about the different options. What do you think in that neighborhood? I think, and have their own voice on what they want to see. Because we had some people who said they didn't want to change it either.
Right.
So-
We might get that too. So.
That's, if we are going to change it, I would love to see them say, this one seems to fit best for us.
It's like a
So the only-
recommendation, really.
The only names that we don't have associated with the location would be Rochelle Brooks Tatras. We just have a region. We're not gonna just name a region, we're gonna name one of the 6. So maybe it'd be helpful to
So what about Redden Farms? I said it's relatively close to where you live.
Redmond Park. We put in Redmond Park for Rochelle Brooks Tatras.
Redden Park, okay, sorry. Can you look and see if any of the late ones say Laird Street, because that would be, we have, just, Mr. Chairman, we did send out, a postcard to the Laird Street folks, and so we're gonna look and see if any of the submissions after that postcard hit was specifically for Laird Street and see what they say. Oh, that's it. Okay, so you wanted me to put Redden here?
It's Michelle Brooks-Tatras.
Got it. Everyone see that a little better?
Was that?
See this chart a little bit better to work with?
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry, that kind of on the
No, that's
fly
good.
here.
We're making great progress. I really appreciate everyone helping move things forward. Where'd it go?
I'm getting it for you, sorry. All right, there you go. There you go.
Okay, so.
All right.
My benefit here.
So Obregon would also probably be Hudson, just so we put something next to each
Obregon
one.
would be Hudson.
Well, it was the flour mill,
Oh, okay.
farmer and worked at the flour mill. And Tyrion. Could be Hudson Lane or Hudson Park.
Hudson Park. Oh, yeah, we have Hudson Lane, remember?
We have 2
And
Hudson.
Hudson Lane actually is, so Hudson Lane's by St. Luke's so let's think of any of these things that could happen in that area. Um,
I come up with another suggestion for Luke Ragsdale because I don't want to leave him out of the mix if it doesn't work out and it say Sotelo is decided, then we don't want to just, I priori decide that Ragsdale doesn't have a place. Second suggestion.
Well, I would then, again, because we heard about what he did at ASU, I would probably put him up in the Hudson area as well.
Okay, Ragsdale.
Yeah, as an alternate. And then the same thing with the Thomas.
Right, Thomas, so.
Because Maggie and Theodore Thomas rented,
Yeah.
dealt with housing discrimination. And so, again, if we're trying to be geographic, the closest would be the Hudson Park or Hudson Lane for them. Just geographically. But I'm not, because they rented to ASU.
Mr. Chairman, if people want to think on it a bit, we do have another presentation about the budget for all this, if you want to come back to it, or I don't know how you feel about it, if you want to keep plugging through.
I'm just thinking some notes.
Okay.
Can I just mention the Hudson Park for Sotelo? It should be East Lord, I think, right?
Sotelo. I wasn't sure. I didn't hear what you guys said.
Well, I don't know if it's east or west, but I think we had Romo Jones for west, but we didn't have.
Right. I just heard Laird. So do you want me to put east or west?
Well, I'll ask everybody else.
I think
West Laird and
Sotelo.
Romo Jones. East Laird, I thought we were thinking about either Ragsdale or San Pablo.
Right.
Was the two
That's
that I
what I
heard.
have
because
here.
Well, and what's the
Ragsdale is a veteran and San Pablo is
Sosa.
geographically
Victory Acres.
associated with that area.
But so, I think Sotelo or Sosa could also go in. I guess I'm thinking if we're gonna ask the neighborhood association, I would give them San Pablo. I would give them several and then ask them their thoughts and have them select. So I would put, I think Sotelo would be East Laird, not West, because I think West
Yeah.
Laird is Romo Jones, right?
Yeah, it's such a clear association.
Yeah, so I would put Sotelo as East.
Okay. I'm sorry, I heard you guys talking about that, but is this something you want us to proactively do, but just in La Victoria, like Victory Acres, or where are you wanting us to ask neighborhood associations for feedback?
I don't know if we have consensus too.
Oh, okay.
Not all of them, but we're thinking about the La Victoria neighborhoods, since we have a number of possible ideas, and we didn't, San Pablo maybe, it could be offensive, I don't know if it will be or not.
We
should
didn't,
decide what.
we didn't find anything that looked like it was overwhelming for people asking for Laird Street, a particular name, so that was after that postcard, just so you know.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't obvious from this anyway.
So I would just suggest.
Was it?
It's not West Laird for Sotelo, I'm sorry.
It's East Laird, okay.
Yeah, that, I was just going to say that too. I was going to say, isn't Sotelo East Laird because of geographic locations with the Sotelo family, correct?
Okay.
But I guess it depends upon if you want to.
I would personally like to see us ask La Victoria Association, if it's possible.
Ask them because we have more than one.
Yeah.
And because, is it the veterans, is that going to be the more important, or is it more important about people who were moved there? I mean, it's their history, and I guess I would like to see what they.
To that point, if we come up with recommended names for each of these facilities, do we want to go out and do a postcard in each of these affected areas and say, this is the name that the committee is recommending? This is a window for you to give feedback on any of it prior to going to council. We can catalog that feedback. We can either convene one more time or just send the feedback to council for further consideration.
Don't we do for all of them now? I mean, because there's some that are just logical. You think about Rochelle Brooks Huntress, I think Redden Park is it's ideal and I don't know, and people around Redden Park may not have even heard of her, maybe like, who is that? But we know, we've studied this issue, we know how central she was to be. And I mean, the same thing goes with Robo Jones and the West Laird, the Laird connection. It's such a strong connection, but it may not be known so much on the street.
Could I?
It seems like, I know Hudson and La Victoria is where there's been kind of agitation about all this. That's why maybe, I don't know if we do to all the street, all the town names, because then we're gonna get into a whole rabbit hole, but maybe we should think about Hudson and Park and Hudson,
We just ask Monica, I would love to know.
Monica had to drop off because she went to a school board meeting.
Yeah, I was curious on how they made, what they did in terms of that, whether they made the recommendations and then went back out to the community, or whether they did.
I believe the school board made the decision and they did not go back out.
There was some internal conversations though, because I know their list changed and added some extra people. I don't remember exactly. I don't think it was involved in that. Yeah, like they took the first round of public input and then they had some names and I know that list of names changed and I don't remember exactly how that changed other than just conversation.
It changed. And then they made the decision from there.
Okay, but the push to add, Ms. Mosley was more of an, like a, okay, so it wasn't like public hearings, it was just people contacting them and asking them to like augment their list.
I think Justin, your hand was up earlier and then Mel.
My statement or question has been answered or taken care of. Thank you, Andrew.
If we select names and then send postcards out to the neighborhood associations, whatever, and if they come back and say, I don't like that name and we only gave them one, are we then reconvening? Now, how are we gonna work that process?
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's,
something for consideration.
you make a good point. I was just, again, my suggestion about sending out, if we're gonna do it for one location, I'm looking, if consistency is possible, then I would err for consistency. If it doesn't make sense, then that's fine too. I'm not against the idea of sending a message to certain neighborhoods and not others. But, I hear what everyone's saying. There are some I think that we feel very strongly about, there are others we have questions. And if there are natural distinctions along the way, then that's fine, but optimally, we can have a slate of names and then a slate of potential names for future naming. That would be great, but if we need to meet again, or if we want to have staff conduct some additional outreach, we can do that as well. I'm certainly open to whatever the consensus of the group is.
Chairman, I was thinking that there will be opportunity for public comment at the council meeting for
Correct.
people to give input, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't want to put council in a position where if they get a lot of outcry that we didn't anticipate because we never asked the question and they would say, well, this isn't ready. You didn't answer these questions. We need you to go back and do more. My hope again is once we bring it to council that they have enough that they can make a decision that night if they want to. But but yeah, I see. So I think Lauren and then Sharon.
I think for Pocamel and sorry, the green, we need to have alternatives as well, because I would hate to see, it seems like we really should think about Pocamel for some area, and maybe it's Harrison, maybe it's not, but I wouldn't want to foreclose like it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be Pocamel versus green. Right now, it's one or the other, so I think we should come up with alternatives for both of them.
And I was just gonna say, if it's okay, then I think we just focus on La Victoria because of the question that Lauren had about San Pablo. And sort of kind of give them these options and say, here's the history of each one. Who would you like? And ask them to weigh in for that community because of that.
And that's for East Laird. Right?
Oh, it would just be for East Laird.
And did you say, I had 4 down, San Pablo, Sotelo, Sosa, and Ragsdale, or all 4 of those being offered, or?
Well,
Some
we could have
limited.
discussion on all of those and we could have a recommended name or names for that. Right now, we have 4. If the committee would like to forward all 4 to the neighborhood, we can do that, or we can decide here if there's a preferred name or names of that list or rank order them.
I will remind the committee that many people who submitted submissions specifically wanted Sosa to be considered for Hudson Park as Park de Sosa. That's actually, there's several submissions here, just so people know that.
That's good to know.
Comfortable with them?
Me too.
Would it make sense, or is it, just thinking aloud here, could not, I mean, those two families, Sotelo family and Sosa family, were both, seems like they're both geographically associated to some extent with this Hudson area, where Hudson Lane, Hudson Lane though isn't in Hudson Park, is it?
No.
It's over closer to.
No.
It's within the vicinity, Hudson.
Yeah, it's close.
It's within the vicinity.
It's certainly closer than any of the other assets that are.
They said Hudson Park though.
Just the Sosas, there was clearly like a, a lot of people wrote in similar types of things and they all talked about Hudson Park being there.
These are two historic families of Tempe, both of whom, I mean, it's kind of getting back to a point that was made earlier is how do we, I think Phil made the point about how do we sit here and say that one of those two is deserving of a name as the other? Would it make sense to potentially have a Sotelo Sosa Park? That's the name of the park. And then that gives you two names, both associated with the same geographic area. And then we can look towards other locations.
I had said to keep them separate, but now that we're where we are, it might make sense to group them together and have them be at Hudson Park as a possibility. Especially if a number of people were requesting Sosa there, and since the Sotelo family since they were connected. So I agree with what you're saying.
I have to leave. I have a library board meeting.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Terry.
You want me to combine them on the?
I just put that out there. I mean, go ahead, Justin.
If we did do that, which I'd be perfectly fine with, because it sounds like that was the area for both of these families and how together they were. I really did like the idea that was being suggested of using Park Day instead of whatever name park. I really like that, using the Spanish language to represent park.
Park de Sotelo Sosa.
Park de Sosa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Okay,
For Hudson Park, right?
for Hudson Park. So let me,
I don't. We got more submissions for Sosa than Sotelo for what it's worth, I guess.
I think that's good.
I don't know if I have Park spelled right. I'm just gonna double check.
In terms of history, Sotelo Ranch, which became Sotelo Addition, is kind of considered part of the foundation of Tempe, along with San Pablo and Hayden's Ferry.
Yeah.
So we could remove the Sosa below.
But, and that's part of why Sotelo, I mean, I know we're going back and forth on this, but that's why, to me, Sosa and Sotelo were so important for La Victoria, is because that's part of the foundation. So I know we're back and forth on all of that. I don't have a way to make any decisions, other than to remind us that that's part of why I thought it was important that it's associated with La Victoria.
Right, but in your process came to see the connection. I mean, we know only 6 of these are gonna actually go through. Some may come through later on. It could be decades later on.
Right.
can we see perhaps if we can pluck a couple of low-hanging fruit if they exist here on the 6 names? I think it sounds like when we haven't put up any other suggestions for West Laird other than Romo Jones. Do we have, first of all, do we still have a quorum?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, you need 11 to have a.
11, okay. And I'll ask, do we have sufficient direction to staff to forward to council the Romo Jones name as like a Romo Jones Street for West Laird. Is there any other one in that list that would you want to additionally suggest besides Romo and Jones or West Laird? I don't see anyone else. Okay. And then similarly, do we have consensus to forward Michelle Brooks Tatras, which is the only name up there for Redmond Park, to be the recommended name for Redmond Park from the committee? Is everyone okay with that as well? Okay,
That sounds good.
good. So now we're down to 4. That's helpful. I hear what you said, Lauren, about Hohokam and Harrelson. But we actually, we do have another, we have the green also for Harrelson.
I also know that Thomas was a Buffalo soldier. Does it seem appropriate to put it as a possibility for East Laird Street as well? Not a 20th century veteran, but.
Okay.
And I don't know if you want to consider.
Pardon?
We haven't been able to confirm that he was in the 10th category, but we don't know yet. Just FYI.
Okay.
With me.
And I don't know if you want to also consider ethnicity with that, because Lavatory is a Hispanic community.
Right.
So I'll just raise that question. We're thinking about things like East Laird.
Well, Souza, or maybe Souza, Hudson Park, maybe should remove, well, Obregon is maybe take away Hudson Park. Maybe recommend this a possibility for East Laird. See, Obregon is Hudson Park. We're kind of settling in on Hudson Park and Souza Sotelo. Do you see? Yeah. With Obregon?
Oh, yeah, no, I got that. I was thinking of Ragsdale. We put him in there because it's a veteran.
Right.
But that's my question.
Hudson Park.
Put him in there for Hudson Park. For East.
Although I thought we're all settling on, so some versions, Souza or Sotelo for Hudson Park.
Oh, just that question. Yeah. Fine.
But if you think about ethnicity, might Obregon be a possibility for East Laird? It's one of the possibilities. If we're removing Souza and Sotelo from the possibilities for East Laird.
Mhm.
And right now it's listed as Hudson Park, which we settled on, I thought.
Yeah, we could put him in East
Do you
Laird.
want to put him as East Laird option?
Trying to find him. If it's the will of the committee.
So your East Laird options would be San Pablo, Obregon, and Ragsdale at this point? Somebody doesn't like that. Okay.
So,
Do we have anything, okay, so for Hudson Lane then?
Well, the same thing with Thomas, we should remove Hudson Park and put Hudson Lane. Maybe another one, but might as well, if we are all decided that Sotelo Souza are Hudson Park, just remove them from the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Do we agree that Hudson Park, we recommend that it be renamed Park de Souza Sotelo? Which.
Yep.
Souza. Okay.
Okay. So tell us so.
So we're firm on Roma Jones for Laird's, West Laird Street, Souza Sotelo for Hudson Park, and then Michelle Tatras for Redding. Is that what we're
I
for
think
sure?
the yellows are the ones that I
Ones in
felt like
yellow
you
items,
guys.
I think we've achieved consensus
Okay.
direction. But those are the names that are associated with those locations.
can I suggest green for, we talked about them for Harrelson, because that's where they lived.
Green for Harrelson, okay,
This is a suggestion.
yeah. I guess I would ask this to you, Raylan. I understand what you said about naming places. Right now, the indigenous name that we have on the list is Cahokamel, which is, as I understand, related to butterfly. From your perspective, if we were to have that as a name for future consideration, as opposed to a name that is currently on the list of actual persons to name after, I just was curious to get your feeling or thoughts about that, Raylan.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. But I know that, with the public comment at the very onset of this, this discussion, I know that many, individuals wanted the inclusion of, a Native American name suggestion as part of this, but I don't see a problem with using Ho'okamal as a future name.
Thank you. Okay.
I do think Harrelson and Green, they have such a strong geographical connection there. So close to where his ranch was.
Is it? Yeah, okay,
I think that's what we figured out, right?
okay. So we have a consensus then from the committee to recommend to council Marion Moses Green Park for Harrison Park?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have Hudson Lane and East Laird left, I think. Let's talk about Hudson Lane first. Right now, we have Maggie and Theodore Thomas for the Hudson Lane up there. Are there any other names that have otherwise been designated for a location that might also be appropriate for Hudson Lane?
I think Lincoln Ragsdale. Given, well, we had a regional contributions and also the strong ASU connection, and that's close to ASU. Close to ASU.
I like the idea of naming something after the Thomases. I do think about sort of geographically in terms of place, because there's already obviously a Thomas Road in Phoenix named after probably somebody else. But sometimes if you have a number of roads named after the same last name, then it could potentially cause confusion. It's highly unlikely, it's just a thought. And I do like the idea of, naming something after Lincoln Ragsdale, knowing that what we know about his overall contribution in the region. And then, of course, with the connection with ASU and Dr. King, I think we can make a pretty, it's my perspective, but again, I don't want to speak for the rest of you in terms of your thoughts about Lincoln Ragsdale for Hudson Lane.
I know that his middle initial J is featured, so we should include that or not. I don't know.
I've kind of got shorthand here. I'm starting to get shorthand here, sorry.
So I understand what you're saying about the Thomas Road, but they were, I mean, when you look at the accomplishments in Thomas, I would put them, and because they were a pioneer family here, he was a Buffalo soldier, local business owner, they dealt directly with ASU on camping housing discrimination. To me, that is really important. So I would support that for Hudson Lane over Lincoln Ragsdale there. So I think there was a wealth of contributions that they made to the community.
Okay.
That's just my.
No, I appreciate that.
Thomas Road and Thomas Lane. And we call Maggie and.
I would think that if we were to name a
Thomas
street
Lane.
after Lincoln Ragsdale, that if we were to do that, my recommendation would be that it would be called Ragsdale Lane. Because I think it's fairly common to name streets after the last name, and then there could be explanatory that it's after specific Lincoln J.
Right.
Ragsdale. So that would be,
Maybe put that in parentheses after it, right?
So you would go with Ragsdale over Thomas?
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, I think both are worthy. I'm just saying that to the point about whether it's Lincoln, Ragsdale, Lincoln J.
Okay.
The actual street should probably, if it's gonna happen, should be called Ragsdale Lane.
Why Lane, why not Road?
Yeah, I think Lane would be great.
Well, I'm just using Lane because that's what's currently the name, is Lane. I mean, right, if you're gonna rename it, it could be Ragsdale Way, I mean, Ragsdale Street or Road or, Boulevard, as far as, they all have different, connotations, but they all basically are names for streets. Doesn't have to
Like
be.
at the Ragsdale way.
Okay. But you make a good point about Thomas and their nexus with Tempe as well.
Well, they did so much
Yeah,
and helped students out and helped with, just based on what I'm, the information.
okay. Well, let me then ask
That's just-
I'll ask two questions. One, are there any other potential names, recommendations for Hudson Lane other than Thomas and Ragsdale that anyone on the group would like to consider for that location? Yes.
So would we want to consider combining them like Romo Jones? I mean, I know they don't have the connection that Romo Jones had, but it would be weird to do it Thomas Ragsdale because that sounds like a first and last name.
Yeah.
But Ragsdale
Yeah.
Thomas maybe? I don't know, just a thought.
I think you need to keep it separate. I wouldn't combine the two names.
It's a lot to look at.
Yeah.
To address it again.
Okay,
That's true.
okay. But is there a third suggestion out of here that we would want to consider for Hudson Lane other than Thomas and Ragsdale?
I'd like to ask.
Yeah. Any thoughts about any other, or about the relative merits of Ragsdale and Thomas for Hudson Lane? Okay.
Just saying, I think it should be one name and not a combination of the name. People wouldn't be able to understand what that is.
But do you have any thoughts based on the history of both? That's what I was wondering, since you gave us some additional history just now, on which one of those two?
I think the same criteria that was used in the process, in the reasoning behind the selections that you made should be consistent throughout. And so the only time that you combine something was because there was a relationship.
Oh,
So so I'm agreeing with you. We're just saying for consistency, I think you should probably follow that same process.
I wasn't asking about combining them. I was asking if you had thoughts between Thomas or Ragsdale.
I think the fact that they both have been recommended and that they're on this list means that they're significant, and then you should probably use the same. I don't think that it should be an elimination based on the two of them. I mean, so if you're gonna use, if you're trying to discern the difference or the merit of Marion, Theodore, Thomas, and Ragsdale, then they have to be considered with the merits of Pokemon and Hokin and Kedro. That's what I mean. But thank you for that.
I do. Just reminding folks that we did get the testimony from the Victoria Acres folks about World War II folks. So I think so last we left Laird is you wanted Victory Acres to be consulted on East Laird's name
Right.
between San Pablo, Ragsdale, and I guess at this point Obregon, right?
Looks like those are the three remaining for that.
So,
Unless, like I said, there was a consensus of the committee to name Hudson Lane after Ragsdale.
Okay.
I'm kind of, sorry.
I'm gonna say, just in looking at the descriptions, to me, it looks like Thomas was more related to Tempe whereas Ragsdale was more related to the general area. Said to me, a greater Tempe influence, I would support Thomas, being named Thomas Lane Hudson.
Yes, Lauren.
Right.
Support this. I know this is contradicting what I said before, that we consult with Law Victoria and give them choices, but I worry just about, I mean, they did give us input that they wanted a veteran, and Lincoln Ragsdale is a veteran. And yes, he's not Hispanic, but the NAACP has worked on behalf of many peoples. So I'm wondering if we could sort of test that name and just say, we found, someone we think is really great and appropriate and is a veteran. And then just maybe see the reaction, or just try it. And then so go with Lincoln Ragsdale for East Laird and Thomas for Hudson Lane. And then we done.
Okay. Everybody hear Lauren? So the suggestion has been made to see if there's consensus to name Hudson Lane after Maggie and Theodore Thomas, and to name East Laird after Lincoln J. Ragsdale.
And I think that East Laird, I'm not as supportive of that. I am very supportive of Thomas for Hudson Lane.
Okay.
But I'm not, they said other things too. I mean, the testimony wasn't just one. They said certainly veterans, but it is a Hispanic community. And I think we have to honor that as well. So I guess I would like, if we're not going to make our own decision, then I'd like to go to them and say, here's a couple of options between San Pablo, Obregon, and Ragsdale. And let them weigh in on that.
Okay.
That's just but you could outvote me and that's fine too.
Okay. So let me ask then the committee, do we have consensus, or is there anyone who would like to provide an alternative, or would not join in a consensus of the committee if it exists, to name Hudson Lane, rename Hudson Lane after Maggie and Theodore Thomas? Is that acceptable to the committee to move that forward as a recommendation?
Yeah.
Okay. Next,
So what did you, I'm sorry.
then
Hudson.
for Hudson Lane, then the next question is, we've had two suggestions made at this point by committee members. One is to forward Lincoln Ragsdale as a name for East Laird. A second suggestion then was to forward the names San Pablo, Obregon, and Lincoln Ragsdale to the neighborhood in Victory Acres for their input as to their preferences as between those three names. I would ask the group, what is your preference as between those two alternatives? Or does anyone have a different alternative for the East Laird renaming?
My vote is to have them, just give them the options of those names.
The three names? Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Ray Lynn, please, yes.
If I recall, there was still information being gathered for Obregon. Did I hear that?
Defer to Brenda and her staff on that. Are we still looking at the Obregon name?
Obregon name is that one you're familiar with, Jared?
I want to get Jared.
Yeah, they were.
Top of my head.
There's
We don't know a lot about Obregon.
yeah, there's a very detailed submission for him. For a few people, it just kind of cut and pasted by the same people, but he is in the Tempe History Museum records, but not nearly as much information as like Sosa and Sotelo. So, but if you're on this thing, if you look at October 3rd, there's a big submission for him.
Okay, because I was trying to look for it and I couldn't find it, so I don't know why it's not, that information's not showing up for me.
Yeah, I don't have anything off the top of my head. I can, easily dig for some of that information. To get folks information to go with that, so.
Okay. Raylan, are you asking because perhaps you think it might be premature to name something after Obregon if we don't have all the information? And if that's the case, then I guess one suggestion is, remember, I think we already decided that we are going to be providing all 11 of these names to council as recommendations. Just that since we only have 6 facilities, the ones that wouldn't be chosen are not being left out. We have the option of saying, as you name other things, these are names that we would, we would request or recommend that you choose from for future name.
Yeah, I would like to see additional information about this individual.
For instance, I'll just put this out here as a thought. This is probably outside my committee and more sort of me thinking city manager-ish. San Pablo refers to a specific geographic location, right? It still exists. There are other buildings and such that are in the area of San Pablo, which I understand really probably represents the area immediately, I think, south of Sun Devil Stadium, mostly. It was a Hispanic community that was located against, the butte there for many years and was moved. In thinking about ways to remember and to kind of acknowledge the history of San Pablo, would working in partnership with whoever owns the property there, which I would think would be ASU, to have, some renaming within that area with directional signage and historical markers right within San Pablo itself. Would that be an opportunity that maybe was more germane to the specific area itself to actually have that conversation? The only reason I say that is because of the existing remaining names, I think San Pablo, like I said, I voted for it to be considered, and I think it makes sense because it's so deeply a part of the history of the city of Tempe. But it is the only one left, I think, under active consideration that isn't for a person. It is a location. And does that location, is our way of honoring it, are there other ways to honor it other than the renaming of the street as opposed to, say, the historic designation of the area itself in some way with whatever currently exists in that area? Anyway, go ahead.
The way signage has been placed under street names for neighborhood associations, maybe we create a similar kind of sign under Veterans Way, for instance, that says San Pablo neighborhood or something like that. So it's not renaming the street, but it's adding additional information that describes historically, here's the area you're in.
It's a possibility. I mean, I'm just putting it out there for conversation. I haven't decided one way or the other myself. I'm just thinking about ways to kind of approach this issue. Yes, Phil.
So what it seems that we're trying to do here is come up with 6 preferred names.
It's possible
for the places. And if we remove San Pablo because it isn't a person, and we suspend thinking about Obregon because we don't know enough, then we've got Lincoln Ragsdale for East Laird. And we can say, we have our 6.
You spoiled my ending, Phil. But that's what I was trying to sort of think of. Again, I'm just putting it out there for conversation. Go ahead.
Thinking a couple things. My brother-in-law is an artist in Oregon, and he did this project called the Portland Acupuncture Project, and he put giant needles, acupuncture needles, all over the city of Portland to identify historic markers, whether historical events, historical peoples, historical locations, and it was a temporary exhibit. But what you said just reminded me of that, the possibility of really Tempe highlighting its diversity by doing maybe even temporary, maybe permanent installations that kind of lead you on this pathway to understand our history better. So that was that fascinates me, and I think that's such a cool thought you had. When I was thinking about Obregon and reading about him, he was pretty central to he's associated with the Tempe mill. And we are redeveloping the mill. I mean, I remember looking at projects as a council member. The mill, I know it's still it's not happening yet, but it's in the process. Could there be a way to honor this memory right specifically to that location, whether it's a room, a facility, because that's going to be a rather large complex. There could be an opportunity to honor him at Flour Mill itself.
Right.
So that could be another future opportunity when we know more about it. We do know it's associated with Flour Mill.
True.
And then again, that brings us.
And that would also provide opportunities to do further research and not commit to a recommendation on if our history museum staff feels like further research is still warranted. Okay. Yes, Phil.
One other question. Are we planning to erect some sort of plaque at the head of each street as we rename it with basically the story of who the person was? Because, as we discussed, the last name is going to be on the street sign, but to explain who this person was at the head of each street, so that at least somewhere along the way, people can say, oh yes, this is why this street is called Green Street.
That's a great idea.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think, given how we got here and the amount of publicity that we've had and interest in the community on this, I think that would be a great opportunity to further the aims of history and to explain to people in future generations why this happened and the significance of this name and how it came about. I think that's great. Yeah. So I am about to ask for consensus, but and I do this with some reservation in that I think we're down to 10 on the committee now because we've had some people drop off. I appreciate that we're a little bit over our time. So thank you for all of you who have been able to stay. What I would say is if of us remaining, we're interested potentially in Ragsdale as being the recommendation, what I would ask staff that we do is perhaps convene a virtual only meeting sometime prior to the end of the year to A, get quorum, and B, see if that quorum results in a consensus direction. On the last one, we didn't get direction on. So I think we have 5 and 6, and I'd like to do that. If the direction is that Ragsdale ends up being the name recommended for Laird, then I think the second part of that would be that we would then not have to then go back out to the neighborhood. And then the neighborhood, of course, would have the opportunity to comment and provide their input to council, but we would then have done our duty. Yes?
Yeah.
But we don't have a quorum right now. So everything I'm saying is just more summation. And I do want to give, I'm sorry, because there's one last thing I do want to get to tonight. I know we're out of time, but for those of you who are here, I would like to have staff quickly talk a little bit about the process and the cost of renaming for streets. So then we'll adjourn.
I can do it pretty quickly too.
Stop sharing.
So I want to preface this by saying that, all the costs that are going to be associated with parks and streets. I talked to Deputy City Manager Tom Dunsing, and those costs most likely will be absorbed by those departments. So they're not going to be new costs to the city by any means. The only new cost would be, I guess, what you all or council possibly decides to give as like reimbursement to people who are impacted. So this would be the cost with street signs. Again, this will be kind of absorbed by the department. It's pretty low cost, just replacing the street signs, labor and equipment costs, that kind of stuff. And going forward with the parks, so there's 3 different options. Most likely the parks is going to decide what they want to do, either replacing the monument altogether, moving and remediating it, bringing it back, or grinding it, pulling it, and then repainting it. So most likely, depending on the quality of the sign, they would.
And just as a note,
Yeah.
Parks is undergoing right now, changing all the signage.
Oh, okay.
So the timing could be very good because they're now soliciting information on what kind of signs, but the timing could be really good.
It's really good to know. And then another cost associated with those parks would just be the rule signage. Since the park name changes, they also have to replace the signage. That includes production, labor, and then the signs cost. So, depending on, the high end would be 93,000, low end would be 65. But like you said, if they're already planning on doing that, it really just. So going to household cost. So I did, yeah.
But as Phil suggested, could we also consider costs of doing signs?
Yeah.
That's certainly.
Yeah, and that would be something that we could bring up, or I could bring up with whoever is managing the project, could bring it up, with Christ. Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I've talked about too. I have it written down, so I'm looking you brought up. Household costs, this is something that we did a decent amount of research on, and I can talk about a little bit more, but at the end of the day, you know, a lot of things that you need your address for aren't physically on anything besides like your driver's license, and then if people have business cards, checks, that kind of stuff. So ultimately, it would be, you know, the driver's license fee. To change your address is free, but then if you want a replacement driver's license, you have to pay $12 for that. And then, you know, there aren't other like mandatory things that you need to pay for to change. So if people just had their address on like business cards or checks, that's something that we could also reimburse them for. But that, you know, that would just be under like a miscellaneous fee. So for our calculations, Keely and I kind of decided that there's roughly 175 households impacted. Roughly, we're only banking on 20% of them having or submitting, you know, these miscellaneous costs. So that would roughly be $1,750. And then if we take, you know, 2.5 people per household in Tempe, which, you know, that we're probably overestimating because not every person, either they're going to have a driver's license, is old enough to drive it, et cetera. That cost would be around $5,250. So totaling, you know, this would have to be a supplemental, or I don't know what department would absorb it. I'm assuming it would be a supplemental. But at the low or high end, it'd be roughly $7,000. So not as much as I think we had thought at first it was going to be. But this is a process that we are working through at the city level, figuring out how this is going to work citywide. I have meetings coming up with Stephanie Dietrich and other departments and stuff to kind of figure out how the next phase of this will go after these names are. Yeah.
So I know Phoenix went through this process, so I
Yes.
assume you've talked to them about all the, I mean, there could be some people who have home businesses since COVID especially, so it has to be, will have a higher cost burden. I know with the utilities, I think the utilities kind of do it for you, right? Wouldn't SRP or APS just change it all for the?
Absolutely. So that's kind of getting into this last part is that, and it's something that I talked to Stephanie Dietrich about, is that is a city process. So any other weight that has to be handled is going to be on the city. USPS is really simple, actually. We just have to send them a letter of what's being changed and they'll fix it. They have proxy names, so it's not like an actual name that they need to change in their system. But so the city, it's going to be a big lift on the city end, which is kind of what we're going to start going through now is, you know, changing city data, making sure utilities are changed, that kind of stuff. So it's nothing that residents need to handle. It's something that will change on the city end. But to make sure that residents are aware of this process, we'll of course mail residents letters explaining kind of this reimbursement process, that the names have been changed, which we already notified them about. There'll be a website up soon about, you know, information on what they have to. It's something that kind of we're going to embody from the city of Phoenix because it was incredibly accessible, was that they explained what people would have to change and then they explained what people don't need to worry about. So it's kind of, we'll go through and then we still need to kind of figure out how this reimbursement process will go. Still need to be figured out with various city departments. And then we'll also kind of send out a checklist for residents on like what they need to worry about, kind of what this process will look like, just to kind of give them direction, kind of alleviate the stress on them. Other than that, that's really about it on my end.
When what the city of Phoenix did, which is what we think we should do too, is just sort of leave it open-ended. So if you have a home business and you do have all these kind of costs, like we would never have anticipated, you can submit those for reimbursement and we can, like, the decision can be made to reimburse them. But the $50 is more just a placeholder.
Yeah.
And we're thinking 20% of the people may need something that costs $50 just to make sure we have money in the budget for it. It might be more than that. At some households, it might be nothing for other households.
Would it be possible to have someone in the city, I'm thinking, you know, assign it to one person as a liaison who can answer all the questions, be the person that people go to, who also speaks Spanish, by the way. And there may be people that need help to just sit down, go to their house. I mean, real personal kind of approach. And it can be one person in the city, so they don't feel like they're dealing with bureaucracy. And I'm thinking also of La Victoria. There are people that live in the shadows. They're undocumented. They might be uncomfortable with this entire process. So we have to find a way, maybe a trusted person in the neighborhood who will be the liaison, who will be the helper, who we maybe pay with a stipend or something to be that representative, because they may trust somebody in the neighborhood more than they trust someone in the city. Not that we're not all wonderful, but you know, there's a certain level of trust we need to
Absolutely.
assume it may not be there.
And of course, once this process gets flushed out more, I assume, 311 will have additional information and training, and the tools to provide people answers, because I assume that a lot of those people will be calling 311 with, additional questions, but I think that's a really good idea.
Is there a cost, this is an ignorant question probably, but like to make sure Google Maps is updated and 911 and.
That's what we're gonna do on the city end. So that's what Stephanie Duchek and I are coordinating right now to meet with various city departments and make sure that Google's updated, utilities are updated, 911. That's kind of the biggest thing, is making sure that public safety is at the forefront of that.
She's our
but-
GIS director.
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, go ahead, Val.
Yeah, I would ask, is it possible for you, staff, to send out a brief summary of what we decided here?
Yes.
The
Yeah, we'll do that. We will do that.
To you all?
Yeah.
Perfect, yeah.
So we'll summarize, we'll do sort of an action summary for the meeting. We're gonna do minutes up to the point where we had a quorum, and then we can summarize after that point.
Yeah.
Thank you all are there any questions about the cost? Anyone? If not, I just want to thank everyone for their time today. I know we took a little longer, but it was a good process, and this is going to be Keely's last meeting with us.
Yeah.
Her last day is with the Friday, moving on to Secretary of State's office. Congratulations.
And thank
She has
you.
done,
Congrats.
just want to say, she has done amazing work putting all this together. Staff has been fantastic in getting us all organized and having materials and making our discussions so much more productive with their behind the scenes work with outreach and this organization. So 3 cheers for Keely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your
We are
work.
adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keely. Thanks for everything you're going to be doing in the